Hey guys, what's up? It's Tess and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be sharing with you guys my best tips on how to make a beautiful travel video. And I'm definitely not an expert, but these are all the things that I do to make the videos that you guys see here on my channel. So if you guys were interested in making one similar, these are the best tips that I can give you. And by the way, these tips definitely apply to just any kind of artsy video and not just travel videos. But yeah, with all that said, let's just get on into this video. Tip number one is to find your story. And this is probably the most important tip in this entire video. It's so important that your video has a story. Just like a book, a video should have a beginning, a middle, and an end to pull your viewer in and keep them engaged the entire time. So first, you have to decide what it is that you want to share with your audience, and then figure out how you can bring that idea to life through visual storytelling. So basically, what I mean by this, if you watched my recent Vietnam video, you know that in the beginning, you saw shots of us getting ready on the bike, putting the helmet on, putting the key in, driving away, and obviously I shot those clips purposely because I knew I wanted to tell the story of us on this road trip in Vietnam. So if you know what you want to share with your audience, you can be more purposeful in what you capture, and then once you get to editing, everything will make much more sense. You don't just want to go out there and film all these random things and then hope for the best once you get to editing. It's much easier if you figure out what it is you actually want to share. So your story, super important. Tip number two, determine what equipment you need to tell that story. So sometimes it's just a GoPro, sometimes it's just a point and shoot. It really depends on what you are trying to capture. Sometimes a more sturdy DSLR or a drone can make a huge difference, but you really don't need a lot. It's really more about the way you use your camera than the actual camera itself. So for example, if you're going on a diving adventure, maybe a GoPro is plenty, or if you are road tripping Iceland like I did in the fall, a drone can make all the difference. So it really depends on what you're trying to capture. I will link what I use down below if you guys are curious. But yeah, before we move on into the next tip, I figured I would mention a little bit about tripods and mounts, because especially when you're traveling, tripods and mounts can be so helpful. I just have the basic Joby Gorilla Pod, which you can just put anywhere, and the legs are really flexible, so you can mount it on pretty much everything. It's really, really useful. And I also have a few mounts for my GoPro, but by far my favorite mount is my mouth mount, which is so weird. It looks super, super weird to use because you actually put it in your mouth, kind of like a retainer, but it gives a first-hand perspective, so you can kind of use your hands and do whatever. So it's perfect for a motorcycle, or if you just want to give a first-hand perspective. I think it looks really trippy because when the viewer is watching it, they have no idea where the camera is. One of my favorite tricks to do with the mouth mount is to record my shadow, because you're like walking and you can't see the camera, so it looks really, really trippy. It's much more steady than a head mount or a chest mount, especially when you're like riding a motorcycle or doing something more actiony. But yeah, when you are traveling, tripods and mounts can be super useful. Okay, moving on to the next tip. Tip number three, frame your shots. So while you're traveling, it may seem intuitive just to hold your camera in front of your face and record whatever it is that's going on in front of you, but what separates a good video from a really beautiful, interesting video is if you actually take the time to think about the composition of every shot. So for example, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I really love to put my camera close to the ground and record feet walking through the frame, or just getting leaves in the foreground. I think that's really, really beautiful and gives a different perspective. And there's just a lot of ways that you can capture unique angles to tell your story from different perspectives. But at the same time, you can't carefully plan every single shot, especially when you're traveling. Sometimes there's just gonna be something really interesting in front of you and you just wanna whip out your camera and record it. And that's totally fine as well. It's good to have a bunch of B-roll so that you have a lot to work with once you get to editing. Tip number four is to view your drone like your camera. And I know that not everybody has a drone, but I felt the need to put this one in here because I see it happen so often. So of course, drones are really fun to fly and you just want to zip them around and do all sorts of fun stuff with them. But when it comes to capturing usable footage, you really have to think about your drone in the same way that you think about your camera. So still, you want to frame your shots and most importantly, record smooth shots with one continuous motion. Of course, you're going to need to adjust your position and the gimbal in the air, but you don't want to include this in your video, which I see so often, and it's such an easy fix. You just want to make sure that your shots are in one continuous nice smooth motion so that they can fit into your video seamlessly. Tip number 5 is to record sound. So chances are in your final video you'll end up using music, but this doesn't mean that you should forget about recording natural sounds. So if you guys have noticed, I really love to keep in the natural sounds in the beginning of my video and then kind of fade into the music, kind of to give it a more natural transition, and I think it just adds a really interesting component. But a little trick for you, if you're ever anywhere and the sound is really amazing, you can record the sound on your camera and then use that sound on top of a different clip. So for example, in the beginning of my Vietnam video, you hear all these nice jungle sounds and birds chirping and whatever else you hear. I actually recorded that totally separate from the actual video clips that you see. So yeah, whenever I'm someplace and I feel like it just sounds really cool, I will record it and see if I can somehow incorporate it into my video. So I think that's kind of like a personal preference thing, but I just think it's really interesting to include some natural sounds in conjunction with your music. Tip number 6 is to choose the right music and then edit accordingly. Music is everything, so don't rush on it. I feel like music actually takes me the longest portion of the editing process, and it's starting to get really windy and it might rain, but that's okay. So yeah, sometimes I can spend hours and hours looking for the right song because the song can totally change the mood that you're trying to portray, and it's really important that you pick something that really goes with the essence of your video. So there are some good resources. I definitely use Epidemic Sound quite a bit, but sometimes I just search on SoundCloud for hours until I find something that I vibe with. And then once you find a song that you really like, you can start editing with it, and it's really important that you edit on the beat. And I don't really know how exactly to explain this, but once you get the song, you can listen to it and figure out where you want to cut each shot, and then you want to cut them in a uniform manner, if that makes sense. Okay, tip number 7 is to be selective while you're editing. So chances are, if you just went on a trip, you will have so much footage you don't even know what to do with it, but don't feel pressured to include every single shot. Only include shots that help push your story along. So I only took one film-related class in college, and that was a screenwriting class, and my biggest takeaway from that class was you should only include scenes that really help push your story along. And if there is a shot that doesn't really do anything, you should just take it out because it will be much more streamlined without it. So if you find that one shot doesn't really say a lot, take it out, and if nothing was lost, then it's probably better to leave it out. Okay, tip number 8 is to color correct and color grade. So especially when you're traveling, you're gonna be shooting in a bunch of different locations under different lighting, and once you get to editing, chances are a lot of your clips won't match. So this is when color correcting and color grading can come in handy, and honestly, I'm still learning this. It's definitely not the most simple thing, and I've actually been taking a class on it, which has really helped, and thanks to Skillshare, who is sponsoring today's video, I've seriously learned so much more about color grading, and it really helped in my last Vietnam video. Honestly, their classes are really good, and they have so many to choose from videography to photography to design, pretty much anything media arts related that you're interested in learning about, they have a class on. And also sometimes I go back to the color correcting class and just go to one chapter because I forgot about one certain thing. And so yeah, you can kind of jump around and get information on what you specifically need. But yeah, I would definitely recommend it to you guys, and Skillshare is offering the first 500 people to click the link down below a free trial. So can't hurt to try it. They also have some really good beginner classes for Adobe Premiere Pro, which is the editing program that I use, which can be super intimidating if you're just starting out on it. And they have like tons of beginner intro classes on that as well. So yeah, I will link the color grading class down below, and then I will link my favorite intro to Premiere Pro down below. And yeah, go ahead and check it out. Tip number 9 is to stabilize your shots, both in camera and while editing. So I personally don't own a stabilizer because they are pretty pricey, but if you have a stabilizer, obviously that's a really great way to stabilize your shots. I personally just try to have the steadiest hands possible, which I feel like isn't that great of a tip, but your video will flow so much nicer if your shots are steady. But luckily, you can also stabilize while you're editing, so I use Warp Stabilizer on Adobe Premiere Pro, video, and it's like my best friend while I'm editing because it seriously makes such a big difference. I will show you guys an example of one shot not stabilized and then the other shot stabilized, and you guys will see how big of a difference it makes. But yeah, having stable shots can really make such a big difference in your video. And tip number 10 is just to keep it real. There are so many super fun, awesome things you can do with editing, and sometimes really fancy transitions and all of that stuff can really add to your video, but sometimes it can also take away from it. So my last and final tip I will leave you guys with is just to try to think about how you can make your viewer feel like they're right there with you on your adventure and make them feel what you felt in those places. So yeah, with that, this is going to conclude this video. Hopefully these tips are helpful, and if you guys create any videos with these tips or just any videos in general, send them to me and I will totally check them out. But yeah, thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye guys!